at these three men. Let's call them Sweaty, Sassy, and Stinky. What do you think they all have in common? Actually, they're all the same person. They're three iterations of Lancelot Dulac. Sweaty is Lancelot from the Morte d'Arthur. He convinces the king's wife Guinevere to sleep with him, which is immoral and people don't like it. These people are mainly King Arthur. He also kind of slightly kills a man. Sassy is Lancelot from some French poem with a title I can't pronounce that translated means Lancelot the Knight of the Cart. He also convinces the king's wife to sleep with him, but adultery is totally cool now so people don't mind as much. Stinky is Lancelot from Merlin. He doesn't convince the king's wife to sleep with him, but his dead body is later magically puppeteered by Morgana and it ends up happening anyway. So, how did this division occur? Let me introduce you to a little concept called cultural context. Sweaty is from the Morte d'Arthur, which was written in approximately the 1470s. It was written by Sir Thomas Malory in Warwickshire, England. At the time, England was historically Christian, so we can infer that this text may have been influenced by Christian ideals. Sassy is from approximately the 1170s, written in Treux, a place in France by a guy named Chrétien de Treux. France had just taken a nice long crusade, and through the process of accidental culture acquisition, concepts like courtly love are influencing many French authors. Stinky is from Merlin, published in 2008. It was created by a group of individuals we will refer to as the J Squad. There's Julian, Jake, Johnny, and Julian II. Yes, those are their real names. They all come from various parts of the United Kingdom, but you won't believe how difficult it is to find the precise address of someone who hasn't been dead for 800 years. This TV series was written and produced during the contemporary era, so you know what that means? It's postmodernism time. I swear I'm going to be attacked by Nietzsche in my sleep at this rate. I can't escape. So now that we have a general idea of what context surrounds our three heroes, we can discuss the text in further depth, like the implications of postmodernism that caused Guinevere to get banished for kissing a zombie. Let's begin with our first text, Le Morte d'Arthur. For this we'll need our first Lancelot, Sweaty. Sweaty is a great knight, noble, strong, chivalrous, and he always washes behind his ears. He's a paradigm. Book 3 of Le Morte d'Arthur painstakingly establishes his character as a plucky French orphan prince who abides wholly to the Pentecostal oath. Summarized, this oath boils down to don't be mean, do be loyal to King Arthur, and drink your respect women juice daily. What a specific set of rules. I bet this foreshadows nothing. This is just a happy story about an orphan who's good with a sword. Obviously, Sweaty, the greatest, isn't a title that will last eternally. This book, number 3 if you forgot, is based on a poem by our friend Chrétien de Treux. Remember that pesky courtly love thing? Chrétien wrote a great deal on it, and this poem, Lancelot the Knight of the Cart, is no exception. There are several truths to courtly love, but for brevity we will focus on the three most contextually important. 1. Marriage is no real excuse for not loving. 2. When made public, love rarely endures. 3. Love can deny nothing to love. These doctrines are essentially the adultery starter pack. Thus, they are vital in explaining the morality and supposed virtue within the affair between Lancelot and Guinevere. In the original poem, and we will discuss it on its own, the adulterous Guinevere and the traitorous Lancelot become the archetype of courtly love. They, in context, transition from ethically dubious to an unjust tragedy. If courtly love is righteous, then they are prime examples of virtue. Now, when Thomas Malory was writing Le Morte d'Arthur, he was in the centre of a Christian England, and Christian ideals don't exactly jive with the whole adultery starter pack thing. The conflict in moral principle between Thomas's Christian ideals and Chrétien's notion of courtly love has one main impact on our boy Sweaty. It morally compromises him. In order to maintain the quintessential aspects of the original poem while catering to the common Christian discourse, Thomas had to emphasize the wickedness and dishonorable nature of Sweaty's conduct. This trade-off sustained the initial plot of the poem in tandem with the Christian model of the time. By changing the tone in which Sweaty's actions were presented, Thomas could justify the Christian viewer while accurately preserving the integrity of the original text. Whether this was intentional on Thomas's part or if he was just a product of his circumstance is mere conjecture. He died 500 years ago. It's not like we can ask him. The effect is still the same anyway. Sweaty is otherized through the emphasis of his immorality. Other characters in Le Morte d'Arthur, Galahad, are used to exemplify the contrast between knightly nobility and Sweaty's character. These characters are initially defined as ethical and then are put in opposition to Sweaty in order to separate him from righteousness. In the case of Galahad, who is characterized as Lancelot, but better, that division is most obvious. Thomas Malory establishes two things that Sweaty can't do. 1. Resist the temptation of Guinevere's spicy, full-length, error-appropriate ball gown. 2. Find or even see the Holy Grail. Funnily enough, Galahad could do both of these things. What a nifty coincidence. In fact, Galahad was so good at these things, he had his own special seat, and it was a very special seat. It was a known murderer. Yes, the seat has canonically, for as much as that means in Arthurian legend, taken a life. Being a dramatic little chair, it would outright kill anyone who sat on it without the acclaimed title of Grail Knight. Galahad was, of course, the Grail Knight, because what wasn't he? Adulterous is the answer. And Sweaty was decidedly not the Grail Knight. He was not the Grail Knight to the point that he, in Book 6, actually found the Holy Grail, and it rejected him by means of magic fire. Galahad, like the archetypal hero he is, fetched the Grail as a side quest amongst his rescuing of maidens and healing of unfortunately injured fisher kings. The comparison between Galahad and Lancelot exhibits the spectrum of virtue. By contrasting them, Sweaty is presented in an unfavourable light. Thus, his actions are also deemed unfavourable. The text also very clearly specifies that it is his extracurricular activities with Gwen that kindles his corruption. Sweaty is one of, if not the most respected knight at the time that he begins his dubious leisure activities. His morality is only put in question after and relating to his suspicious camaraderie with Gwen. It begins with hubris and ends with him murdering a fellow knight. His actions split the brotherhood that was the Round Table, and it ultimately finishes in Fall of Camelot. Long story short, Thomas Malory really doesn't like it if you're keen on the king's wife. Speaking of keen on the king's wife, on to Lancelot 2, Electric Boogaloo. This is Sassy from Lancelot the Knight of the Cart. This was written right in the middle of those pesky crusades, and if you didn't know, the crusades were a bigger failure than I am to my parents. The official reason for the crusades, not considering the intricate system of politics involved in securing the border between the Byzantine Empire and the occasional pillage, stood as, look at those nasty non-Christians, they're in the Holy Land, let's conquer them and take their land. Also, it's to stop them from being savages in their heathen culture. But the crusades wear irony like a colourful cloak that will make your brothers sell you as a slave. Even that Christian analogy tastes of irony when you realise that all the crusades did was bring said heathen culture to everywhere, especially the everywheres that the Christian crusaders were. This so-called heathen culture is the proverbial birthing canal rationale for courtly love. It was an instant hit in France, and it especially resonated with a certain someone called Chrétien de Troyes. This is obvious when you dissect the character of Sassy. Sassy is, unsurprisingly, when you read the text, Chrétien's personal creation, a Mary Sue before the term was even coined. And I checked, Mary Sue's first appearance was in 1973 in a Star Trek fanfiction. Chrétien had a good 800 years on the concept. Sassy is put through a ridiculous amount of trials, and he beats them all because he's totally cool and awesome, and also he's a prince, not just your ordinary run-of-the-mill abandoned orphan, and Guinevere falls in love with him instead of Arthur. The objectification of women as a trophy to validate a man's character as typically masculine and righteous aside, Sassy was every part the rugged swashbuckler. He was chivalrous, gentle, powerful, and pretty much any positive adjective that Chrétien could think of. His entanglement with Guinevere was not morally reprehensible, instead it was the ideal fulfillment of courtly love. The original Lancelot, Sassy, was not otherwise due to his ethical inadequacies. Quite frankly, in Chrétien's version, he didn't have any inadequacies. Sassy was the consummate sum of morality, as was dictated by the context of France in the 1170s. If I were to list it, as clearly as I could for something so ambiguous, Sassy and his, the king's sweetheart portrayed 27 of the 31 convictions that formed courtly love. This, at the time, reinforced Sassy's nobility, because an aspect of courtly love is the honour that comes intrinsically from the pursuit and achievement of courtly love. What Chrétien de Troyes was writing was essentially the medieval equipment of a young adult novel. Love makes his characters better. Finally, we have our third Lancelot, Stinky, from Merlin. While the other two texts stand in moral opposition, Merlin is like the undecided middle sibling. Due to the contemporary culture that it was written in, Merlin rejects the fluidity that its predecessor, Le Morte d'Arthur, suffered to develop Lancelot's character. It also rejects the now outdated values of courtly love. While it can be presumed that antiquated concepts like courtly love fall out of the common culture as said culture evolves, the justification for avoiding character growth is more complex. The reason for this stagnant approach to characterization can be found in the postmodern idea of bad faith. Bad faith is inauthenticity. It is a rebellion against the true self, usually for the purpose of conformity. This conformity is wholly undefined and is quite subjective, but it generally manifests as social pressure. Bad faith is, in the postmodern perspective, dishonest and deplorable. Never mind that the pressures of bad faith also insist on personal conformity, even if it is to the self. If someone is fundamentally good, it is bad faith for them to do wrong. Likewise, if someone is fundamentally bad, it is bad faith for them to do right. In this ideology, circumstance and society are removed from the individual, therefore the individual is free to be what they are. This notion of faith and authenticity is the reason that Stinky's character never evolves. In the first episode that he appears, Stinky's first scene is of him saving someone he considers vulnerable, even at risk to his own well-being. He then occupies a majority of the episode, both coveting a position of righteousness and discouraging the immoral methods that others use to grant him that position. He only succumbs to persuasion when he is assured that it is indeed the most noble approach. Then, after facing a murderous beast alone because it aligned with his moral principles, even when others ordered him away from the danger, he refuses to even consider the notion of a knighthood, that position he had been coveting, because he realized that it was not him alone that defeated the beast, and he did not want to take credit for an action that was not all his own. This is the juncture where Stinky leaves Camelot and the show until 12 episodes later in Season 2. The characterization of Stinky is essentially indestructible at this point. In one episode, he has been utterly and thoroughly pigeonholed as the resident good guy. It would be bad faith for Stinky to change so drastically as to imitate the Lancelot of Le Morte d'Arthur. This is where the predicament lies. There is no possible balance between creating an accurate adaptation and maintaining the steadfast nature of Stinky's identity. If the J Squad wanted Stinky to portray Arthur while remaining faithful to his virtuous qualities, they'd have to do something crazy, like entirely remove his agency, or make him completely powerless to an evil that had previously been established as malevolent, and in doing so shift the accountability from Stinky onto that malevolent being, while still technically having Stinky perform the nefarious deeds. Yeah, you guessed it, they did do that. Although, you probably haven't guessed how it was done, because he sacrificed himself in a previous episode only to have his dead body paraded around like a skin suit for dark magic while his soul was suspended in torment, is quite a grim guess. Despite the therapy that the writer obviously needs, they broke through the limitations of a faithful adaptation, in every sense of the word. All the Lancelots got through the limitations of their adaptations, really. Except you, Sassy. You are a glorified self-insert OC. These texts were each shaped by the historical and cultural context as well as the dominant discourse. From the same root, each one was transformed so that even as they told the same story, the values and characterizations were uniquely disparate. Each text distinctly represents a great geographical location and a time that influenced them so that they deviated into three separate stories that a poor extension English student would eventually have to hobble together in a multimodal presentation. The other, in terms of Lancelot's morality, transitions between the texts due to the change of context between where and